So, back in early 2026, a regional conflict just exploded, and it sent these massive shockwaves across the entire globe. Today, we're going to break down how the war between Iran and Israel didn't just stay in the Middle East. We'll see how it created this incredible ripple effect that touched everything from global supply chains to the price you pay for gas. To really get a handle on the sheer scale of this, you have to start with the human cost. According to the humanitarian group ACAPS, within just the first 2 weeks, over 3 million people inside Iran were forced to flee their homes. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of Chicago, uprooted in the blink of an eye.
So where did it all start? The flashpoint was February 28th, a joint offensive, which the U.S. called Operation Epic Fury and Israel called Operation Roaring Lion, launched a whole series of coordinated strikes. They hit military and industrial targets inside Iran, and just like that, the war was officially on.
And man, things escalated fast. Breathtakingly fast. On that very first day, the strikes didn't just begin, they also resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader. That move alone sent tremors to the entire region and basically guaranteed a swift and brutal response from Iran. Okay, let's switch gears and look at the direct military fight. For decades, Iran had built its entire military strategy around one key asset, its massive arsenal of ballistic missiles. This was the absolute centerpiece of the battlefield, and it's the key to understanding those chaotic early days of the war.
Now, what's really wild here is the sheer scale of Iran's capacity before the war even started. Look at these numbers from Ginza. They went into this with around 400 launchers, something like 2,000 medium-range missiles that could easily reach Israel, and up to 8,000 short-range ones for closer targets. That is a ton of firepower, enough to overwhelm even the best missile defense systems out there.
But here's the thing. That impressive arsenal, it got hit hard, and it got hit fast. The initial U.S.-Israeli strikes were devastatingly effective. Within just the first week of the war, an estimated 75% of Iran's launch capacity, we're talking the trucks and the silos you actually need to fire the missiles, was destroyed. This was an absolutely critical blow, and it forced Iran to completely rethink its entire strategy on the fly. And this chart just spells it out perfectly. The core problem for Iran wasn't just about the number of missiles they had in stock, it was about their ability to actually launch them. Seeing their capacity drop by 75% in 1 week created this huge bottleneck, and that forced a massive change in strategy. So with their ability to keep hitting Israel seriously crippled, Iran made a very deliberate choice. They pivoted. They took their remaining and much larger arsenal of short-range missiles and started aiming them at U.S. allies in the Gulf, countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The whole goal was to widen the conflict, create political chaos, and try to force the U.S. to the negotiating table. Now, let's turn to the other side of this, the human cost. Because behind all the military hardware and the strategic calculations, there are real people whose lives were just completely torn apart by all this. The numbers coming out from humanitarian groups like ACAPS are just staggering. In a little over 2 weeks, more than 1,400 civilians were reported killed. To put that in perspective, that's like having a major airline disaster every single day for 2 weeks straight. And among them, so tragically, were over 200 children. One report I read cited a single strike on a school that killed more than 170 schoolgirls. Just let that sink in for a moment. 170 young lives just gone. And then, beyond the fatalities, you have over 18,000 civilians injured. This completely overwhelmed a healthcare system that was already stretched thin. Hospitals were overflowing. Doctors were being forced to make these impossible choices about who they could save and who they had to let die. So all these numbers, they paint a picture of an absolutely massive humanitarian crisis. For the millions of people displaced and injured, the needs were for the absolute basics: shelter to hide from the strikes, food, trauma care for the wounded, and of course, urgent mental health support. For those who survived, the scars of this war will last a lifetime. Now, this conflict was never going to stay neatly within Iran's borders. The next ripple effect was the destabilization of the entire Middle East, a region that, let's be honest, has been a tinderbox for decades. From the Israeli point of view, the war actually presented a kind of strategic opening. Prime Minister Netanyahu framed it as a rare opportunity to build a formal military alliance with Arab nations who also saw Iran as a major threat. This was a huge shift in regional politics, and it really showed how much the conflict was changing the old balance of power. This basically set the stage for two competing strategies across the whole region. On one side, you had this emerging coalition of Israel, the U.S., and some Gulf states. And on the other, Iran activated its well-established network of proxy forces, what they call the Axis of Resistance, to fight back. This deep divide would have consequences for years to come.
And that proxy response came from all directions. You had Hezbollah opening up a major front in the north, forcing Israel to fight on two fronts. The Houthis down in Yemen started messing with global shipping lanes, which messed up trade and drove up insurance costs. You had militias in Iraq hitting U.S. interests, and a constant barrage of drones and missiles being fired at Gulf nations. It truly set the entire region on fire.
And that brings us to the final and biggest ripple: how this regional war sent a shockwave through the entire global economy. Because in today's interconnected world, a fight in one part of the world can have a really profound impact on all of us.
The key to understanding all of this is a tiny little geographic choke point called the Strait of Hormuz. A huge percentage of the world's oil has to pass through this narrow little waterway, making it one of the most important strategic spots on the entire planet. And in response to the initial attacks, Iran moved to disrupt and control it.
And that move kicked off an immediate chain reaction. First, disrupting the strait created instant fear of a supply shock. Second, global oil prices surged. Third, insurance and shipping costs for any ship in the region went through the roof. And fourth, all those higher costs for energy and transport fed directly into global inflation. So even if you've never heard of the Strait of Hormuz, you were probably feeling the effects of this conflict every time you went to the grocery store.
And to see why this matters so much, let's just look at one concrete example: India. An economic analysis of the impact on India shows just how vulnerable nations that depend on imports were. They were dealing with crazy oil prices, which led to higher inflation. Trade and supply chains were all messed up, which led to shortages. And a falling currency and unstable markets just made it harder for everyone, from big businesses to regular people, to make ends meet.
So the crucial point here is that this was never just a regional war. In our interconnected world, its consequences were always going to be global. And as our world gets even more connected, the potential for a small conflict to have a huge global impact is only going to get bigger.
And all this leaves us with a final, really difficult question. In an age where a spark in one region can basically start a fire that affects the entire planet's economy, what does it really mean to contain or de-escalate a conflict? And how do we even begin to prevent the next regional crisis from becoming a global catastrophe?